Welcome into our special edition sporting news podcast. It is the Mount Rushmore podcast here. Just completed Mount Rushmore week here at the Sporting News, and we're here to break it all down. Carlin Gale alongside the Hall of Famer Mike DeCourcy, Matt Latufsky, our senior editor of fantasy sports and of course gaming, and of course our senior editor of college sports, Bill Trocchi, the mastermind behind this project. Bill, the floor is yours. What is Mount Rushmore?
Mastermind might be a little too kind, Carl. I don't think I had too many mastermind fans while I was beating everybody's back to get the deadline to hit the deadlines for the project. But anyway, this project actually for me, it's kind of funny. It goes back 10 years almost. I was at Sports Illustrated. I was at a national sports publication, and proposed something similar to this and figured out, what we might be able to do with it, things like that. And I mean, it was maybe 2 weeks worth of traction. And the NFL Network announced that they were doing their Mount Rushmores of each franchise in about a month. And so that project got shelved pretty quickly. And then left Sports Illustrated, and then landed here last year. We were talking about some projects to do, and I thought about this one that we never got off the ground at my last national publication job. So proposed it, and here we are. So a lot of hard work from a lot of people, and I think everybody saw it this past week, and very proud of how everything came out. So what we did was, we narrowed it down to 13 cities. I mean, the Mount Rushmore concept's been around for a long time, but we decided to narrow it down to 13 cities that had an NBA, an NHL, MLB, and NFL team, and WNBA. We have one WNBA athlete we're proud of. For at least 20 years, it turned out 13 cities qualified for that. And then we've got, certainly some three-sport cities that are terrific, have great names, and maybe that'll be a version 2.0 down the road. I don't know. We'll see. I know Mike DeCourcy's got thoughts on Pittsburgh. We all know that already. But so then as far as we put guardrails around what cities we were going to do, the only really rules we had as far as the athletes was that they were professional athletes and that they were athletes. No coaches, no owners, no general managers. And we tried to balance, resumes and popularity and, the Hall of Fame credentials and, longevity and that type of thing. And so it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I mean, I was amazed inside and outside the office how many times I would mention this project and we would have different opinions and what mattered to different people. And, in the end, we're just offering our opinion and we're starting the conversation. There was been a lot of conversation over the last week on Twitter and Facebook and things like that. And like I said, I'm happy that, Sporting News put their resources behind this as, an authority of sports in the United States for over 100 years. Tons of archive content from these legendary athletes that we have up in all of our stories at sportingnews.com. It's very cool to read how the sports writing has changed over the years and things like that. And they tell the stories of these legendary athletes. And so it's been fun, and I'm very proud of how it came out.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. You should pat yourself on the back, but don't tear your shoulder out of the socket doing that. So as you said, 13 cities, 13 different panels across the country, made up 13 different Mount Rushmores. The four major sports in each city were the NHL, MLB, NBA, and of course the NFL. And as you said, the criteria is pretty simple. Just do your best job of representing the city. Only qualifier was you had to be a pro, no coaches, no GMs, no managers, just players only. So let's get right into it with one of the key cities. But first, want to bring everyone's attention to one of the hot sports podcasts out there right now. Fastest writing sports podcast, in my opinion, the SN7 podcast, hosted by the talented Dimitra Obalor, the SN7, your daily dose for top stories, cutting through the junk and getting you to the core of the news that you may have missed the night before. The top 7 stories in 7 minutes, daily at 7 a.m. It's the SN7 podcast. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get to the debate time now. We had some fun. The three of us, Mike, Bill, and I, were on the Philly panel. And boy, you talk about debate, you talk about back and forth. I won't say there were sleepless nights because that's a little bit over exaggerated, but I did think about this a lot even after we closed the book on the Philly Rushmore. And the athletes that made it, for those of you that might have missed it this week, Allen Iverson, Dr. J of the Philadelphia 76ers, Mike Schmitz, former Philadelphia Philly great, and finally Bobby Clark of the Philadelphia Flyers. Mike D, I'll start with you. There's a dilemma in Philly because one man, a Philly native, did not make the list and may be the biggest omission of all 13 cities. His name is Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah, the two biggest problems we had with Philadelphia. First of all, the team in Philly, if you ask Philly fans, and they will very eagerly give you their opinion, the team in Philadelphia is the Philadelphia Eagles, not represented. We just couldn't find an Eagle whose face belonged on this mountaintop. They have had some great players, obviously. Chuck Bednarik, the last two-way player, part of a Philadelphia Eagles championship season, as well as being an all-time great player. You had Donovan McNabb, one of the great quarterbacks of his generation, played in a Super Bowl, didn't quite get it done, but played in a Super Bowl. And then you had Brian Dawkins, one of the great strong safeties, one of the great safeties in the history of the game, but not quite. Maybe his teams didn't quite get all the way there, and although he was a fabulous player, not quite to the level of the guys that made this list. So it was a difficult thing. And then as well, you had this debate, which was really almost a generational debate between Wilt Chamberlain and Allen Iverson. And I believe that if Wilt had been a Philadelphia Warrior / 76er for a longer period of time, I don't think we would have had a debate. I don't think that the younger crowd could have mustered up, cultural impact and enduring popularity. I don't think, but 50 points a game and every scoring record in the book. I don't think they could have been able to pull it off. But because Wilt played about half his career, maybe not even quite that, in a Philadelphia uniform. Warriors at first, then they moved to the Bay Area, and he went with them, and then eventually came back when the 76ers were introduced, and was part of, maybe at that point, for a long period of time, the greatest of all NBA champions, the 1967 76ers. And don't try to say that at home. That's not easy. But I still believe that in part because he is a Philly guy, went to Overbrook High, grew up in the area, and then became a Philadelphia pro, I still believe that his greatness surpassed Iverson's combination of greatness and enduring popularity. But I was outvoted, and I'm not trying to Bigfoot anybody. I can understand how the popularity, the phenomenon that Iverson was as in terms of pop culture and sports culture. The idea that if you go to a 76ers game now, you still see tons of Iverson jerseys, even though he hasn't played for the team for about a decade. He's been in the Hall of Fame for about half a decade or so. So I understand that. And I've said many times, and I still believe this and probably will believe this for the rest of my life, that Allen Iverson is the single greatest pure athlete that I've ever covered. Just could have played anything and been great at it, and chose basketball and put everything he had into it. If Allen Iverson wasn't that guy who left everything on the floor every night, I might have fought even harder. But I have so much respect for him. So I totally understand why the younger voters who were on the panel supported him to the lengths that they did.
Mike D was, as I said, a strong supporter of Wilt Chamberlain. And honestly, I felt like he was the one athlete of all the panels I was a part of where I had the most it was gut wrenching for me to leave him off. That was the only athlete I felt like that, and we'll get to another one a little later on, who was pretty close, but wasn't that guy. Matt, I'm going to bring you into the conversation because you were not a part of the Philly debates, but you saw the Rushmore come out just like everyone else, and your initial thoughts were what?
Well, I thought pretty much got it right. I think Mike's right. You want to put an Eagle on there, but there just wasn't one. I think with Wilt specifically, this keeps happening to Wilt, where he gets downgraded because he was so good. It's the oddest thing in the world with sports. You go, oh, come on. Those numbers aren't, I mean, must have been using a ladder. I don't know what was going on, but no one averages 50 points a game for an entire season. He's too good. It doesn't count. So let's move on and find someone else. It's a weird phenomenon with Wilt Chamberlain. It happens when you just talk basketball in general. It happened here again. But I also think just the mere fact he bounced around so much throughout his career, and we couldn't really tie him to Philly as specifically as we could even Dr. J, who played elsewhere too, Iverson, who of course bounced around at the very end of his career, Schmidt, Bobby Clark. You just couldn't quite do it. So, did we get it right? I'm sure people have thoughts. I think we did. But it was tough. That was a tough city for a variety of reasons.
It was one of the cities where I felt like we had to represent all four sports, and we didn't end up doing that, Bill. We kind of left the Eagles off, but in the end, you were part of the discussion early. And you were on the fence with AI and Wilt going back and forth, but you felt pretty strongly about Dr. J. Why'd you feel so strongly about Dr. J specifically?
I love Dr. J. I mean, I just thought he was as beloved as Iverson in a different way. I think Philadelphians were so proud of him being sort of an ambassador for the game, and he became national when he came to the Sixers. He was at UMass in college, not a lot of national exposure. He was at the ABA, and people heard about his dunking and all this stuff. But once he got, I mean, Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but once he got to the Philadelphia, then people saw what this guy could do, and he changed the game and raised it above the rim. And, I don't think of the Sixers. I start with Dr. J, his battles with Bird and his championship over the Lakers. I mean, he meant a lot to that city. They finally got that title. I definitely was comfortable with Dr. J, no question about it. I wanted an Eagle. I was fighting for an Eagle. I was looking for an Eagle. I couldn't find an Eagle. I wanted Brian Dawkins. I talked to a lot of Philly people. And he was just the heart and soul of that team that went to 4 NFC championship games in a row. They had a ton of success. He personally was on 4 first-team All-Pros. He is in the Hall of Fame. And he was just, that popularity factor that we talk about with Iverson. Dawkins had that, I thought, on the Eagles side. I talked to a couple of people in the media in Philadelphia, directed me to an Eagles historian, Ray Didinger. And I emailed him, and I got about 1,000-word email back lobbying for Chuck Bednarik. He said Chuck Bednarik, no question about it. Not only was he the best, the last two-way player, he was the best center in the league and the best linebacker in the league simultaneously. And so he made a compelling case as well. But in the end, we ended up with 2 Sixers. That's, again, part of the debate, part of the fun. I think most of the returns that I've seen, that I saw when Philadelphia came out, endorsed the fact, understood where we were coming from. Eagles were the most popular team, didn't have the signature guy, right? And so then going with, and nobody really disputed Bobby Clark from the Flyers, who's, great player on a very popular team, influential team. Flyers are very popular there too. But he was more of an iconic name and on iconic teams than any Eagle, really, Dawkins or whatever. I mean, Bednarik was it's so long ago. So few people saw him play in person. Hard to get memories out of that and that kind of thing. So, it was a fun debate, fun city. And I don't know that we'll ever solve it, but we got what we got.
Yeah, we got 4 great names. I don't think anyone could dispute that. Whether or not you want to add to it or take away one player, they're all great names at the end of the day. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, which you can, if you are listening to the audio version of this and you're watching this on YouTube, don't bother typing in Chuck McNarick on YouTube. You're not going to find any highlights for him. They're not available there. But a great player in his day for the Philadelphia Eagles, and definitely was in consideration of making the Mount. But to Bill's point, a lot of people probably seeing them out for the first time, hearing about them. There's a lot of Eagles fans that probably never even heard of Chuck McNarick. Like he played so long ago that maybe his time just wouldn't translate to today's game. One person though that did translate, and Wilt was probably the next best. If we were to have 5 names, it would be Wilt. I think most people would agree. A memorable night in Philadelphia when he had his jersey retired. That would always be a special night for the city of Philadelphia. And here he is in his comments about his love for the city.
I want to thank Mr. Katz, the 76ers, for allowing me a chance to come back home, a native son of Philadelphia. What I don't owe to my mother and father, I owe to the great game of basketball. And I learned all my basketball in this great city of brotherly love. And I have many friends and fellow players in the audience today that has as much to do with the raising of that number 13 as I did. They taught me, and they taught me well. And I was fortunate to come up in an era where basketball was king in Philadelphia. I dreamed a lot as a young kid. I wanted to be like Jackie Moore, who went to Overbrook High School, and I followed him there. I wanted to be able to shoot the basketball like Hal Lear, who also went to Overbrook High School. I wanted to pass and dribble like Guy Rogers, who went to Northeast High School. I wanted to be an all-around player like Tom Gola, who went to LaSalle. Or a consummate pro like Paul Ireson, who played for the Philadelphia Warriors. Well, like my brother-in-law, who had a lot of confidence in the game, but went to Benjamin Franklin High School, Claude Gross. I had a lot of teachers and a lot of people that I admired and wanted to be like. And I dreamed of the day that I could do some of the things that they did. But I never dreamed of a night like tonight. And those are the side benefits that come along with trying to do something right, I guess. But when you look up there at that number 13 in days and weeks and years to come, I don't want you to think of it as a guy who garnished a lot of rebounds and a lot of points. I want you to think of it as a guy who has a lot of friends. I'm going to count you guys all among them. Thank you very kindly.
There is the great Wilt Chamberlain addressing the crowd, giving the Philly love that only, the great athletes that play there anyway, can do. Because some still get booed to this day, for even, some of the successes that they've had. Let's move on and talk about another city that wasn't that tough, in my opinion. And I was sitting on this panel, and I know at least one of us on this panel has an argument to make for another name that should be on this Mount Rushmore. And of course, I'm talking about South Florida / Miami. Now, let's be absolutely clear and absolutely honest. There was no way a Florida Panther was going to make the Miami sports Mount Rushmore. There was no way, Florida Marlin was going to make this Mount Rushmore. So it really came down to 2 teams. It came down to the Dolphins, and it came down to the Heat. 2 spots were stone cold locks. Dan Marino and Dwayne Wade. No one is going to debate whether or not those 2 should have been on the Miami sports Mount Rushmore. Marino did not bring a championship, but when you think about the Dolphins, he did go to the Super Bowl early in his career and has a ton of records still, to this day. Dwayne Wade, 3 rings, was able to, claim the first one with Shaq, then later on 2 with LeBron James. No one will debate that he is Mr. 305. Shout out, I know Pitbull is Mr. 305 really, but in terms of sports, it is Dwayne Wade. The other 2 spots were a little bit up for debate, and it was really, again, between 2 teams. It was between the Heat and the Dolphins. The other 2 names that ended up making it, we have Bob Greasy, the quarterback of the undefeated 72 Dolphins. Again, I think if you're going to talk Miami sports, you have to have someone from the undefeated team. and it was between Greasy and Zonka. Greasy took it. He was a guy that obviously quarterback normally gets more love than anyone else on the team, and also spent a ton of time as a broadcaster and still worked with the team, still was around the team. You still feel his presence at random training camps here and there. So I think Greasy, took the nod there. The other name, which was a shock to some, not to me, was Alonzo Mourning. He was the fourth name on the Miami Sports Mount Rushmore. I see Mike DeCourcy laughing. I know how Bill feels. Matt, I'm coming to you first. Did we get it right with Miami?
Well, I have no problem with Alonzo Mourning. If you're asking me specifically about him, I actually thought he should have been on there. To me, it was the other spot where, again, you said it's the quarterback who always gets the credit. I think Larry Zonka was a better player, though, from that team. He also hosted American Gladiators. I was going
to say, it must be American Gladiator.
Yeah, I don't know why that didn't count for anything. But there was other guys on that team, too. But I don't think there was another city that we did where I wish we could have included either college players or coaches as much as Miami. Because I just would have said, throw Don Shula on there. Let's get someone from the U, and let's keep it moving. Because there weren't a lot of great candidates. There just weren't. But if you want to specifically talk about Zoe or another guy who's a pretty good basketball player, you guys might have heard of, LeBron James, if it should have been him and his 4 years, his little college sabbatical he took at Miami, was that enough to get him on the list? Sadly, it probably was. It probably should have been, just because of how dominant he was during that time there, leading him to 2 titles. I have no problem, though, with the list the way it is. Guys who just sort of parachute in, parachute out. I don't think that represents the city that well. And so I have no problem leaving LeBron off. But if we just want to get down to numbers, down to impact, down to titles, then LeBron should have been on.
Our very own Scott Rafferty wrote a terrific piece about the 4 years that LeBron James spent in Miami and just how dominant he was by the numbers. And by the way, you could head on over to the Sporting News right now. Don't wait any longer and read all the companion pieces that were written of the 13 cities that had Mount Rushmores, and also some archive pieces from, a lot of Hall of Famers, I'll call it. I know we have a Hall of Famer on the panel, but we've had more Hall of Famers in our annals as well, that we were able to pull back. And as Bill said earlier on, kind of read how sports was talked about back in the day. Go on over to thesportingnews.com and also follow us on social media at Sporting News. And on TikTok, we're over there too. We're hip at The Sporting News on TikTok. All right, Bill, I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about LeBron James. Go ahead.
I'm just curious. It just occurred to me, Mike, that we got 2 Georgetown guys that just snuck in under the wire. I don't know if we've got some Georgetown influence somewhere in the upper reaches of Sporting News, but Alonzo Mourning and Al Iverson got the nods there, and they both went to Georgetown. To me, and everybody values things differently, right? Not only was his 4 years so dominant, I just felt like if you're a sports fan of Miami, a Heat fan, those 4 years were like the best 4 years that you're going to have, the best 4 year stretch. I mean, obviously they've been great and stuff, but like those 4 years were like the pinnacle. Like every game was a carnival, like it was so important. It was so fun. And they had parades before they even started playing the big 3 in that era, right? So, just the memories and the moments. And so you get to ask yourself, well, is 4 years long enough? That's the question. That's what you have to value. But the 4 years were so dominant and provided so many moments, 2 titles, 4 finals, and, countless just crazy games and everything like that. Like, that's what you remember as a sports fan. It's the moment. It's the titles. In addition to 2 MVP awards, second in one of the years and third one of the years. So, it's not like he was along for the ride. He was driving the bus. He did everything he possibly could. Mourning won the title when Shaq was there. He backed up Shaq, right? He had 2 stints with the Heat. His second stint was when they won the title with Wade and Shaq, basically. He was in the rotation, but it wasn't his team, obviously. He spent a third of his career not in Miami. He wasn't one of those 20-year guys where, like, you want to give him he's a lifetime Heat kind of thing, whatever. So I didn't feel like he matched up. Obviously, I think the numbers were he played 11 years in Miami and LeBron only played 4, but LeBron did more in his 4 than Mourning did in his 11. in my opinion. So I don't know. I'll let Mike chime in and say
he did. To be fair to Morning though, LeBron did have better teams to be able to perform better. Like no one's going to debate whether or not LeBron James or is a better player than Alonzo Mourning, just one-on-one. No one's going to debate that. But the teams around him were also better. Like second best player was Dwayne Wade, and we're talking about Chris Bosh, who was a star of his own team when he got there as the third best player. So they were geared and ready to win championships with LeBron James. Not to say that Mourning had bad teams, because he was, still very much in the late part of the 90s, a team. He had a team in Miami that was very much picked and pegged to go to the finals, and they just weren't able to get there. But they were also running into Michael Jordan, right? Like it wasn't the same playing field as the Indiana Pacers that LeBron James was going through, and the Boston Celtics that LeBron James was going through. Mike, go ahead.
I think what I believe is that if Alonzo had played his entire career as a Heat player, if he'd been drafted by the Heat and more or less finished up, whether it was his last game or, he played somewhere for the declining years, I could have seen him being ahead of what LeBron accomplished. But that wasn't the case. I mean, he began his career in Charlotte, comes to the Heat, and becomes an outstanding player for them, but never one who gets all the way over the hump with the teams that he had. And they were pretty good teams. I mean, they had those battles with the Knicks that were obviously great theater, but they weren't able to ever become that team. I thought the defining statistic of this debate is LeBron was there 4 years, and Alonzo was there basically double-digit years. And yet LeBron played in more NBA playoff games with the Heat than Alonzo did. I think that says it all. 4 years, played in over 80 playoff games, and Alonzo couldn't match that in his entire Miami tenure.
Yeah, but doesn't it still feel as if LeBron's 4-year tenure in Miami was a little bit of a letdown? Like, doesn't it feel like they should have won 3 titles or 4 titles? Like, that's what's so insane about looking back on his time there. And it sounds crazy. I mean, you're snickering, and you should, because it is crazy. But it's also kind of like, yeah, well, you should have beaten Dallas. Why didn't you beat Dallas? You know what I mean? So it's just a weird thing with LeBron and his time in Miami. I think everyone looks at it as just like, yeah, he just went there. It was like I said before, it was like he went to college, left, went back home. And it's just tough to really tie that to a city, I think, for what we're doing. And whether or not Alonzo Mourning or Brian Greasy or, had we gotten Jason Taylor or we would have tried someone else would have been the right answer. Yeah, Miami just didn't give us a lot of great options. And that's just where that's at. So blame yourself, city of Miami, if you don't like your Mount Rushmore.
That's the Will,
complicated relationship.
That's the Will Chamberlain syndrome that you're talking about. He's getting penalized for being too good.
Yeah. But you know what we should have done? Miami retired Michael Jordan's jersey, right? The Heat did. So we should have just been able to take another player who didn't wind up on a Mount Rushmore that we wish would have, and said, you know what, Larry Bird, you're going to be in Miami just because we want to get you on.
Miami does have that complicated relationship with LeBron James. Only 4 years, but so much success in that 4 years. Definitely the peak of the franchise as his time in the NBA. 2 titles and 4 finals appearances. No one will be able to take that away from Miami. But here's Pat Riley and what could have been if LeBron James had stayed longer than just those 4 years.
When LeBron made that call, I saw a dynasty fly out the window. I didn't blame him, but I knew that was a 10-year team. It was just a sad day for me and for our franchise, because I wanted that dynasty. I wanted this city and this team to go 10 years and maybe be in the finals 8 times. I don't know how many championships we would have won, but I don't have any rancor towards him at all.
All right, there's the great Pat Riley talking about LeBron James's exit from Miami. Sounds like he thinks they could have won a lot more than they did, to Matt's point. Maybe he left a little bit on the table. Now, LeBron obviously went on to win 2 more rings, so we could debate LeBron a little bit later. That's a podcast for another time. All right, I feel like the gloves are going to come off now, gentlemen. New York was probably one of the tougher Rushmores to end up finalizing, because there's so many sports teams in that area. And it feels like you really have to look at it as a tri-state area, right? Like, it's not just New York sports. I know the Giants don't play in New York. They play in Jersey. Same with the Jets, right? Are the Devils there? What do you do with Mets players that have, just an attachment to the city? heck, one of the best Mets is in the Seinfeld episode, right? Like, what show is bigger than, just the Seinfeld for the city of New York? Like, they take pride in some of that stuff. And we came down with 4 names that I think will always be debated, no matter what the 4 outcome was. Like, those names are always going to be debated. When you looked at the list, Mike D, what was the one name that you thought to yourself, we probably should have definitely had on?
I think Tom Seaver would have been the one because, I think the best way to do this probably would have been to have a Mount Rushmore for each borough except Staten Island. Staten Island, you can kind of brush them aside.
That just would have been the Wu-Tang clan.
Staten Island would be Wu-Tang and Davison. I think that would have been it, right?
Sure.
But I think that Tom Seaver defined the Mets, and I think if you look at what he did in terms of his excellence, his grace, his growing up with that franchise. My friend Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post did a beautiful article about 6 weeks ago about the trade of Tom Seaver to the Cincinnati Reds and how that was a devastating moment for the Mets as a franchise, for a generation of fans. I think Tom Terrific still, and he is the Tom Terrific. They try to steal it for Brady. He was there first. I think he still resonates with Mets fans 50, 60 years later in a way that it's rare for any athlete with any team. And I think we should have found room for him somewhere. That's the guy that I would have loved to have seen on there, and I think that Mets fans in particular would feel needed to be there.
By the way, I've sort of said this beforehand, just in case you missed it this week. The Rushmore for New York ended up being Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth, Walt Clyde Frazier, and LT Lawrence Taylor. Bill, do you agree with how New York turned out? Because there was a lot of debate about other players, whether it's Jackie Robinson, Derek Jeter, the Mark Messier, Patrick Ewing. The list goes on and on of New York great athletes. Were you happy with the 4 that we ended up with?
It was an impossible task. It is, as you noted, I kept myself off that committee. So there was a reason for that. It's an impossible task, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to get it wrong either. So many guys are worthy, right? You could have 4 Yankees up there, no problem. Mickey Mantle. You didn't even mention Mickey Mantle when you were going down the list, I don't think. I mean, it's crazy. You look at these.
I didn't mention Joe DiMaggio.
Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, unbelievable. Baseball Reference, he had 7 straight seasons where he was top 4 MVP voting. 7 consecutive.
He played
seasons.
for the Mets too.
He played a couple of games for the Mets, so there you go.
Right.
He would have got bonus points. It was unreal. So, like I said, I don't think we could have gotten any of them wrong. The one guy I wanted on more than any other was Jackie Robinson. The reason the panel felt like he wasn't necessarily a New York Rushmore guy, he's a United States Rushmore guy. His influence was national. It wasn't New York. It almost diminished his stature. I understand that argument. I was more along the lines of he's right alongside Babe Ruth and Michael Jordan in this country, sports-wise. And he played all 11 seasons for the same team in the same city. So I understand why people don't identify him with New York, because he's identified with the Dodgers. The Dodgers are the team that took the risk, that broke the color barrier, did all those great things. And, he is a Dodger through and through. And they've been in Los Angeles for so long, you think of him almost as Los Angeles. You do not think of the Dodgers as Brooklyn, as New York in any way. But, we're historians at Sporting News, and we know that he played in New York City for 11 years. So, he was Rookie of the Year. He was MVP. It's not just that he broke the color barrier. He was an unbelievable player, right? I mean, he went to 6 World Series, went to 6 All-Star games, played a whole bunch of different positions. He played first, second, short, third, and outfield one year, started at all 5 of those positions at one point. I mean, he could obviously do it all. He led the NL in steals, led the NL in average, led the NL in on base potential, all in different seasons. So, I mean, the guy had the creds to get on there as an athlete. We're not just put him on there because he broke the color barrier, but he broke the color barrier and he changed baseball forever. He changed sports forever. And he did it all in New York. And so that's sort of what I was pushing for. And that's the guy, to me, more than, I think Wilt Chamberlain to you, to me, the guy I wish was on there somewhere was Jackie Robinson.
Probably could have, made it on a Mount Rushmore had he played anything other than baseball too. Baseball was apparently his worst sport. He could have made it in hoops, could have ran track, could have done it all, played football, could have done it all. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think New York was obviously difficult, like you guys have all been saying. But to me, Jackie Robinson has to be on that list. Babe Ruth has to be on that list. I think Mickey Mantle has to be on that list. I know it's tough. Lou Gehrig was great. The numbers are there for him. We all know his incredible story. But like Mickey Mantle to me was a better player and is just, I don't know what it is. Mickey Mantle. I grew up always hearing about Mickey Mantle. He just, to me, is baseball to me. And I originally was like, well, Joe DiMaggio's got to be on that list. I had a song written about him. The guy was dating Marilyn Monroe. And then I thought, well, no, wait a minute. Jackie Robinson played there. That's right. Okay, sorry, Joe D. And then you got LT, complete game changer, arguably probably the best defensive player in NFL history. There's just so many. But, I think the Walt Frazier is sort of the guy that I wouldn't be surprised people were looking at going, wait a minute, Mickey Mantle's not on the list, Walt Frazier is. Wait a minute now, Jackie Robinson's not on the list, Walt Frazier is. Yet Tom Seaver, Yogi Berra, mentioned a bunch of the other guys who'd be candidates to be on there. And, that's not one I personally agree with. I get he was a very good player. We all know that. Got rings. Is certainly a New York fixture, a New York legend to this day. Everyone knows him and his outfits and the rhyming and all that good stuff. And it's great. We all love it. But I just ultimately you look at it and say, well, he's not Mickey Mantle though. Like, what are we talking about here? So and that's where it comes down to. I think we wanted to represent another sport, which I get. New York, when I think of New York, I think of it as a hoops city. But I just didn't think he was quite there. To me, is almost reminiscent of we want an eagle, but we just can't get there. We'd love a Nick. I just don't think we could get there with New York. We put him on, and I think that was a debatable choice for sure.
That's why. So that's one where I actually agreed that with Clyde being on there, and New York's probably the only city that of the 13 that I feel this way. Whereas because there's so many great players, you have to go to that extra layer, and Clyde has that extra layer. Like he's not from New York, but you wouldn't know that. Like if you didn't know where Clyde was born and raised, you would just assume that he's a New Yorker. It's almost the same as Magic Johnson. Like if you didn't know Magic Johnson was from East Lansing, Michigan, you would just assume he's from LA because he is LA. Like he's a Laker. He's a part of that community. Clyde has that same feel. And there's a generation of fans that never seen him dribble, but know him from just calling the games. And I feel like that just adds to him. Like that just adds to his resume. And when you're just splitting hairs between Hall of Fame talent across multiple sports, you got to look for something, right? Like LT is probably the only one on the list that made them out that maybe you only know him as much. He made it based off of what he did on the field, right? Like I don't like. I'm not to say he's not in New York, but most of his resume and his career, and he doesn't really go back and get the love. He was never really a broadcaster. He did some pro wrestling after where he was figuring out things to do. Like he did, but most of it you remember for him just being on the field and being dominant and not being able to be really guarded by anyone. Any offensive tackle was just, out of their depth with him. But I feel like Clyde, he's just a New York guy.
Well,
he's a New York swagger.
Namath, a New York guy with New York swagger?
I was going to bring him up.
A New York guy with New York swagger. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to bring. There's a lot there. There's a lot there, but there's so many names. You can only pick 4. I know Bill and I had a private conversation about Joe Namath's stats. Like, it's laughable after he won the Super Bowl, but he's known for the guarantee, right? Like he's known for being Broadway Joe. Like people forget he played at Alabama in the South. Right, like they look at him as a New Yorker. So I could have if Joe Namath made the list. I don't think
that one would have been weird though because the stats really are rough though when you really start digging into them. But just for a city like that, man, we should have done multiples. We should have done JV Rushmore, Senior Rushmore.
Yeah,
and we still would have left people off.
All right, still to come. Yeah. We could debate New York for another 20 minutes, really. LA, La La Land, it is Laker land. They are the biggest team in the city. We weren't going to have an Eagles situation in Philadelphia here because there was too many great Lakers to pick from. And I was a part of this panel, and it got heated. But we ended up with Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Sandy Koufax. Mike D, I'll throw to you first. Did we get it right with the Lakers?
I absolutely believe we did. Again, because, I know Jerry West a teeny bit. I've been able to talk to him a couple of times, and he's the logo. And again, I think surpasses, sort of transcends his Lakerdom. Of course, his legacy as a Laker for a lot of years was just missing out. Not quite as a team being able to get all the way over the championship hump. Eventually, they were able to get that done, but for a long time, that again, much like was the case with Wilt Chamberlain in Philly, they weren't able to get over that Boston Celtics Bill Russell hump, and so that I think that impacted him a little. But I think what impacted him more was Magic and Kareem are two of the 5 best players in the history of the game. And Kobe is probably one of the 15 best players in the history of the game. And again, much like Allen Iverson, has that late-term cultural impact. A generation, 2 generations maybe, depending on how you define generation, grew up with Kobe as their favorite Laker, as the guy that they wrapped their love around. I think even when you look at a guy like Shaq, who at the time he played for L.A., was probably the most dominant single player that's ever played the game in that period of time, that early 2000 range when they were winning trophy after trophy. I think at that point Shaq may have been the most dominant player in the history of the game. And I say that knowing what Wilt did because the competition was more regular, it's not, okay, Russell's there, but then there's some other guys that aren't that great or aren't extraordinary. There were extraordinary players. The game was more popular. It was played in more places. It had become, maybe the second most popular sport in America by the time Shaq was dominating.
There was more rounds in the playoffs, too.
Yeah, and so the fact that that really, against that dominance, it was LA's LA's fan base wrapped themselves in Kobe. That's who they wanted to be. That's who they wanted to be their guy. And, when the relationship between the two of them got a little touchy, I think most of LA said, we're on the side of Kobe. And so I think that said a lot about why he belonged on this team ahead of West, Shaq, Elgin Baylor, so many great Lakers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think those are the 3 guys. It's exceedingly difficult, just like it was with the Yankees in New York and a few other teams in other places. But yeah, those are the 3 guys for obvious reasons. And I think that 4th spot is the one that's real contentious, as you were kind of alluding to. And I know you were caping up for the great one, letting those Canadian roots shine through. I thought Sandy Koufax was the pick, but it's LA. It doesn't quite hit you at first the way New York does, how many good candidates there are, but there are a lot of good ones. And LA, even more than New York, where you start going out to the Anaheim teams and you're like, oh yeah, I guess they would count too, right? I guess Mike Trout would count in this, arguably the greatest modern baseball player. And he didn't really even get brought up. You know what I mean?
He didn't get brought up. His name got
right.
mentioned way after the fact. Like the conversation was over. We had stopped the meeting, and it was like 2 days later.
Yeah,
What about Mike Trout? And, oh yeah.
Right,
Baseball
exactly.
player of the
Probably
last
going
10
to go
years.
down as one of the greats if he could stay healthy. Clayton Kershaw, I think it has a case right there. But Koufax was just so good and so dominant and such an icon too while he played for a variety of reasons and got the rings and had the no hitters and all that good stuff that it's just tough to leave him off. I think his career wasn't that long. Some of these guys get on the list because of longevity. They compile. They're great players. They have good peaks, but it's really that longevity with him. The peak was just so incredibly high that it was tough to make a case for some of these guys. We haven't seen the end of their careers yet, or maybe some other guys in other sports who just couldn't quite hit that level that he hit.
Bill T, I got two for you. Were we right on the Lakers? And then the debate really came down to a Dodger, and it was Koufax and Kershaw. We ended up with Koufax because, as Matt said, in my opinion, the peak was just too much to deny. His playoff numbers, and I don't want to get into the Kershaw playoff stuff. His playoff numbers, Koufax's, were just undeniably good. That I don't think you put him up against anyone. Like my whole thing was, if you were going to put together a baseball Mount Rushmore, Koufax might be in the conversation there, whereas I don't know if Kershaw was, and how you could have that conversation with Koufax and not put him on the LA Mount Rushmore would have been nuts to me.
Yeah, no, I think maybe contentious is good because I think you guys nailed it. I think you went 4 for 4. These are the 4 that I would have picked. I did research Gretzky like you did. We talked Gretzky.
We did a lot.
And I thought one of the check marks in his column was how much the NHL changed when he moved from Edmonton to Los Angeles, and then when he left LA 8 years later. In those 8 years, I think I have it down here, the NHL moved into Miami, Tampa, Dallas, Denver, Anaheim, and San Jose. And then the next year they went to Phoenix, and then the next year they went to Raleigh, and then the next year they went to Nashville, and then the next year it went to Atlanta. So he essentially, that trade brought the entire NHL to the American South and West. And that's how cool he made hockey seem when he came down to Los Angeles. His resume's good in LA, not close to what he did in Edmonton. Only one MVP in 8 years, which only, but we're talking about the greatest player of all time. So did not win a title in LA. So I understood.
Got to a final though. Got to a final.
Lost in 5 games to Canadians, but he had 3 scoring titles. Picked up a team that traded everything to get him, and got him to 5 playoffs in 8 years. So. But I have no problem with any of the guys. Like Mike said, I thought the Lakers were just spot on. Jerry West has his case. Shaq has his case. Elgin Baylor has his case, but not the same as the 3 guys. And I think Koufax nudges out Kershaw. And I think the Dodgers obviously are more important to the LA landscape than the Kings, right? So, I think LA hit it right on the head.
If you think about it, the argument you're making, that you're presenting, the devil's advocate argument you're presenting for Gretzky is the argument we used against, as an organization, we used against Jackie Robinson. He belongs more to the world, to the nation, than he does to New York, and that's true as well of Gretzky. He made hockey. It's not obviously the same, civil rights impact and all that, but just in terms of pure sport, he changed the face of hockey in terms of its being a northern sport and a Canadian sport to being a coast to coast, north to south sport. So I don't know that that's a good enough argument for Gretzky to replace a guy like Koufax. When it basically, in a lot of ways, is what kept Jackie off of New York. With better numbers statistically during his time with the Dodgers.
Yeah, Gretzky was indeed great. I'm going to pull an executive move here and play a little Gretzky sound because he didn't make the Rushmore, but I think he deserves a little bit of spotlight. Here's Wayne Gretzky breaking the all-time points record as a member, by the way, of the LA Kings.
Kings are down 4-3, trying to tie this game up. Off the draw, here's Lowell with a minute to go in the game. Lowell cleared to the blue line, held in by Duchesne. Duchesne's pass in deep to Taylor, to Gretzky, he scores! He's done it! Wayne Gretzky, the great one, has become the greatest of them all. The leading scorer in the history of the National Hockey League.
There is the great one, all-time points leader. By the way, if he didn't score a single goal in the NHL, would still be the all-time points leader. Like that's insane. That is just insane.
Can I give a quick shout out to a few other LA guys?
Go for it.
Deacon Jones, I thought, is a guy who very much has the same type of credentials as Lawrence Taylor, without the rings, though. And those guys from the Rams and the Raiders, like, Marcus Allen, I know his name at least came up. It's almost forgotten that they were in LA as much as they were. And also want to thank the Clippers and the Ducks for not having any real candidates to bog us down any further than we already were.
It was tough. Eric Dickerson was another name, by the way, that came up in LA with his exploits as a running back there, and even Aaron Donald now, because we were just coming straight off the Super Bowl when we had these conversations. It's only been there for 2 years now. 3 or 4 years? But either way, I think as time goes on, he's going to be in the conversation for LA Sports Mount Rushmore. All right, there was a little bit of debate in terms of who made the Boston Sports Mount Rushmore as a Celtic. We ended up with Bill Russell. By the way, the Boston Sports Mount Rushmore: Bill Russell, Tom Brady, Ted Williams, and Bobby Orr. But the Celtic ended up being Russell over Bird. Saw a lot of debate online about this. There was a lot of debate internally about this. Mike D, you're shaking your head. I'll go to you first. Why? What
to
happened?
me, that's not even a debate. Larry Bird is magnificent, but what Russell did with the Celtics is just ridiculous. I mean, as we mentioned in the conversation about the various other cities Rushmores that we've been discussing, he kept Jerry West from being a champion. He kept Wilt Chamberlain from being a champion. He was the greatest team player, maybe in any of our major team sports. Just changed every game he walked on the floor for. Now, wasn't a dynamic scorer, obviously, and wasn't a great offensive player, which usually is what gets everybody's attention. But don't forget, I mean, this Celtics thing, although they had fabulous players and a lot of guys are in the Hall of Fame, I think a lot of guys are in the Hall of Fame because they walked on the floor with Bill Russell. In the same color uniform. I mean, he did this at University of San Francisco. He did this with the Olympics, and he did this as a Celtic. His winning was not a product that's just of being around other great players. He changed every game he walked into, and for me, although like I said, I wouldn't rate him as one of the 5 greatest players in NBA history. He'd be in the top 10, and he would be for me the greatest winner in any sport. It's Boston's great fortune that the only guy who could challenge him for that title was a Patriot in Tom Brady. So very blessed city. I grew up in the team in the 70s that was called the City of Champions. But I think that the region of champions is New England because of Boston, because of Brady and Bill Russell.
Bill T, this is close to home, so you let us know. You were on the panel, by the way, for Boston, and you were happy to go with Russell over Bird.
Yeah, I mean, it was, Mike illustrated the numbers. One he did not specifically mention was that Bill Russell was 10-0 in Game 7s, which is a pretty good record. I mean, the guy was the all-time winner. He won an MVP as the 4th leading scorer on his own team, which again tells you how valued he was, how great of a player he was, how much impact he could have on the game without scoring. He did have one Game 7 victory over the Lakers for the NBA championship where he had 32 points and 40 rebounds. Block shots were not kept, but I'm guessing he would have had a few block shots as well. Russell had impeccable on-the-court credentials. When I talked to Jackie McMullen, longtime columnist, Boston Globe, ESPN, she's at the Ringer now, she educated me. I knew a little bit about this, but how much impact he had on the civil rights movement off the court. And he was literally in the front row at MLK's I Have a Dream speech. And when MLK was assassinated, the league, this has been a story that's been told, but the league came to him and Chamberlain. They were about to have game 1 of the NBA Eastern Finals. And they asked those guys if they would play. They were considering sitting out. It was a day or two after the assassination. And Chamberlain and Russell were talking, the Sixers and the Celtics were talking about not playing a game because, there was just so much unrest throughout the country, and the league asked them to play because community leaders had told them that this might give portions of the nation something to think about other than just violence and protesting and all kinds of things like that. So they did play. But the second part of that story that she told me was that they suspended the series for 5 days after that game. And that allowed Russell and Chamberlain to go down to Atlanta for the funeral. Okay. And then Russell came back to Boston during that layoff and organized a peaceful march throughout the city to kind of bring the community back together. And some of the people that he recruited for that march were named, Chamberlain did it with him, Jim Brown and Jackie Robinson. So you don't get those kind of names unless you're pretty influential. So Russell had, on the court and off the court creds for any Mount Rushmore in any city at any time. The check marks for Bird, the thing about Bird is just, it's a natural reaction. Like, what are you talking about? Bird didn't make Boston Mount Rushmore. You know what I mean? And I understand that. We did end up with one representative from each team. I'm comfortable with that. The check mark in Bird's column that is not in Russell's column is how popular he made the Celtics while he was playing. The Celtics still were second-class citizens to the Bruins in the 60s, even though they were winning championships. Russell wasn't not as embraced as Bird. The Bruins, even though they weren't very good, it was still kind of a hockey town in the wintertime, a little bit more. And then the 70s came, and Bobby Orr took over, and then it was really a hockey town in the wintertime. And then the Celtics had their run in the 70s, and then when Bird was drafted by the Celtics, he was a junior eligible, which that rule no longer exists, obviously. But he went back to Indiana State for 1 year. Celtics retained his draft rights. They had a right to sign him within 12 months. And he went back to Indiana State. And while he was there, the Celtics won 29 games that season, didn't have a first-round pick. Things were not looking good. But out at Indiana State, Larry Bird's putting together an undefeated season. They get a number 1 seed in the tournament. They reach the Final Four. They reach the national championship game. Larry Bird's Player of the Year. And all these expectations are coming to this lousy team that is desperate to regain its footing in the city as a franchise. And his rookie year, they'd come in and they won 61 games. And then his second year, they had the number 1 pick. They traded that for Kevin McHale. It turned out to be Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. Year 2, it's a title. You can't find a ticket for 10 years. Boston quickly became a basketball town in the 80s in the wintertime over the Bruins. And so Bird's popularity, I mean, and obviously 3 MVPs, 3 championships, like nine first team All NBA seasons, 12 All-Star games. Like you know his on-court credentials. But the way that city, he lived up to expectations. He fed into the whole blue collar thing against the Magic Johnson and the Showtime stuff, and Boston just loved that so much. They just loved it. And, so hard to keep him off. But I think, like we illustrated, Russell's a solid choice.
Matt, there was a small debate, and I emphasize small here in terms of the Red Sox that would represent Boston's Mount Rushmore. Before we close out, I get your thoughts on this. Ted Williams, and we just saw Big Papi Ortiz go into the Hall of Fame, so maybe it's fresh in people's minds all week long. 3 World Series championships there, broke the curse, so to speak, beat up on the Yankees numerous times, so clutch, probably one of the most clutch players in franchise history, and he did not make the Mount Rushmore. Instead, Ted Williams, who not a bad choice, by the way.
Yeah, wake me up when David Ortiz brings a glove to the ballpark, and maybe we can talk about putting him on the Mount Rushmore. But no, he's obviously great, but he's not Ted Williams. I mean, what are we talking about here? It's Ted Williams. And this is a guy who, Bill and I were going back and forth one day, looking into his stats and being like, he should have at least 2 more MVPs, probably 3. Like, it's just insane, the numbers he put up. Best hitter of all time, I think, widely regarded. And going back a little bit to, we got 5 guys for 4 spots. This happened with the Bay Area too, which I know we're not going to get into specifically, but we got 5 guys for 4 spots. 5 obvious guys, 5 guys who have to be on a Mount Rushmore where there's only 4 places. What do you do? How do you whittle it down? It's going to seem crazy that Larry Bird's on Boston. It's going to seem crazy that Willie Mays or Barry Bonds isn't on Bay Area. It's Willie Mays, by the way. And it's just, you start doing these mental gymnastics where you go, well, wait a minute. Why don't we put both Russell and Bird on and we take out Bobby Orr? No, we can't take out Bobby Orr. What about, no, you can't take out Tom Brady. Like, you just can't do it. You can't take off Steph Curry from the Bay Area, and you can't take off Jerry Rice or Joe Montana. So it's just the way it is. There's a 5th guy. Mount Rushmore has 4 faces on it. If when they carved it, they put William Howard Taft on it as a 5th face for no reason, we'd have 5 guys right now and we'd all feel better about ourselves. But we don't. So unfortunately, Larry Bird, you didn't make it. And it's tough. I can imagine being a Boston fan who came of age in the 80s, seeing that list and being just horrified by it. But that's life.
Yeah, that is the life. 4 names, and there was plenty of athletes that were well-deserving across 13 cities. I'm going to go around the horn here. 13 cities, what was the most surprising one to you? I was surprised that Willie Mays did not make it. But when the opposite, the other choice was Barry Bonds, I slept comfortably at night. Matt, what was the name that stuck out to you that while Bill thinks of his name that might stand out to him that was like, oh, surprise he or she
just
made
a
it.
Surprise that they did make it?
They did, yes.
Yeah, I think, Diana Taurasi, and not just because it's a female, but just because you don't immediately think of WNBA, right? And then you think, well, Phoenix, they've had good players, right? And Phoenix, it's a little Miami-ish when you start going down the line and you start going, well, not a lot of titles in the desert there and not a lot of this. And, the teams are a little bit newer and all of a sudden you just don't come up with a lot of people. And then it does dawn on you, wait a minute, it was one of the greatest ever players is in that city, in her sport. And why not? Why not put her on there? And so, I don't think we necessarily set out to do that by any means, but it's just the situation. It made sense. It was one of the situations, I don't think it was a force. There's other, people we could have forced on the list that we, if we were trying to make a statement or do something like that, I think we did a good job of not doing that. But, she made complete sense for Phoenix.
3-time WNBA champion, 2-time finals MVP, and she's only had 1 league MVP. I was actually pretty shocked by that, but by all accounts, and in my opinion as well, one of the greatest to ever do it on the floor is Diana Taurasi, and still going. Still going. I want to drink from the fountain of youth that she's drinking from. Mike, one name that you were shocked by.
Yeah, Todd Helton from the Rockies making the Denver team. He becomes, therefore, the only member of any of these teams with whom I've shared a dinner table. A friend of mine once, I was in Knoxville for a Tennessee-Memphis game, and a friend of mine from Memphis having dinner with him, and he invited Todd Helton. So I got to dine with a Mount Rushmore guy. But I think of Denver as we could have had 4. If you think about it, we could have had 4 Broncos, and we only really wound up with 1, which I was really surprised by that, frankly. So that's, to me, the most surprising inclusion, although obviously a magnificent player and a very pleasant person to eat dinner with as well.
If I was going to go a Rocky, this is Canadian Bias showing. I'm going with my man Larry Walker, right? Like that's my guy. If I'm going with a Rocky, but that's also biased from my.
I actually thought that too, but was talked out of it because apparently Todd Helton is Mr. Rocky. Now Larry Walker is the only member of the Hall of Fame to go in as a Rocky.
Should probably went as an Expo too.
That's
could have went there.
That's a check mark in your favor. Yes,
did you get more time?
Yeah, I looked at the list. There's 2 guys that I didn't realize were as good as they were until we researched them in this project. One was Horman Killebrew, and one was Bob Lilly. Now I kind of knew them, I knew the names and everything like that, but I didn't realize they were as great as they were. So I learned a lot about those guys. We talked about Alonzo Mourning. I wasn't thrilled with that spot that he got over LeBron. I just didn't think he had the resume or the longevity situation or whatever. So if I had to say that, when I heard Mourning, that was a surprise to me. I know I didn't realize he meant as much to the Heat community and franchise as he does. I was educated on that as well as throughout this project. I mean, that was, part of the rewarding part of this project was learning so much about all of these guys, and how much they meant. And, there's so many historical pieces that the sporting news has. You could read about them and understand them and learn them. Like that was a really nice piece to have the resources that we had to put together, a really comprehensive project. When we started this, I'd go online and look up, Mount Rushmore this, Mount Rushmore that. It's definitely been done, obviously, but I feel like we really did a nice, thorough job with the resources and the brand that we have, and I was really happy how it came out. And that was part of the fun. Was, like I said, just learning about guys that, 'cause I think there's only 7 active players, maybe 6 or 7, something like that. And so, a lot of these people retired before I started following sports. Not a ton, but but you realize that they still resonate in their cities, and that's kind of a cool thing.
No question about it. It was definitely fun putting this project together. 13 cities, 13 panels, 13 different Mount Rushmores, and over 1,300 different debates over the last couple of months amongst the TSN staff. I want to thank you guys for spending this time with me and breaking it all down. We hope that you enjoyed Mount Rushmore week over at the Sporting News, and encourage you to go over to the Sporting News and read all of the pieces, 13 of them to be exact, and all of the companion pieces. There was a lot of great stuff for folks that did not make the Mount Rushmore. We talked about a lot of names that didn't make the Mount Rushmore, a lot of compelling arguments for those that should have made the Mount Rushmore this time around. For Bill Trocchi, Matt Latufsky, and our Hall of Famer Mike DeCourcy, I am Carlin Gay, reminding you that it is the Sporting News Mount Rushmore week, meaning we could probably do this again next year. Thanks for joining us here on the Mount Rushmore podcast here from the Sporting News.